In the last video, I was talking about philosophy, and people tend to come to me, and I receive these kind of questions every day, a few times every day, asking, how do I get introduced to philosophy, or how do I start in philosophy? Which is quite funny, because when they make these kind of questions, they actually want what they want behind it is to acquire some sort of knowledge which is known as the philosophical knowledge that might distinguish them from other people as far as they acquire this and start to use it. Because philosophy nowadays became a fetishistic product, something you might pay, and you pay pretty well to acquire, and that distinguishes you from other people by the financial availability you have to buy the time required in order to know what they call philosophy. And philosophy, as a fetish, is a reduction of the thing itself. What is commonly called philosophy is a group of small phrases, tropes, quotes, which is in nothing, absolutely nothing different, fundamentally different from fashion. Acquiring clothing that makes you look different from the other people because you could. So then if one cannot learn philosophy because philosophy is not a learnable thing, what is philosophy then? And in order to answer that, I bring here the famous book from Pierre Hadot. It's called What is the Antique or the Ancient Philosophy? Qu'est-ce que la philosophie antique? He asks. His research comes from a long way, but it became pretty famous during the 90s, specifically. This edition here, from the editor called Folio, which is a pretty famous one, is from 1995. And what are the insights that Pierre Hadot brings us? Well, first of all, philosophy is not something that you learn because it's a way of life. Therefore, you cannot simply reduce everything to a term philosophy, meaning there is no such a thing as a single philosophy. There are plenty of different philosophical perspectives, points of views, schools, and history. And that's precisely what he shows here. And the most interesting aspect here is that he shows that philosophy is originally something pretty close to what we call nowadays self-help. Although I despise this genre of literature, human beings have always looked for tips for self-help. And as he brightly shows, as we talk about ancient philosophy, and schools of thought such as Stoicism, for instance. A philosophy from Zeno and the Stoa. The Stoa is that covered part of public buildings in ancient Greece, a public space in which people would gather to speak about things and teach people how to live in a certain way. If we take this movement as an example, we can see that people adhere to that school in order to learn how to live in a certain way. And the school obviously has its philosophical backdrop, deeply engendered in the Aristotelian physics, which meant that the world was something rigid, determined by the spheres and concentric spheres with the immovable motor at the end, which we, as Christianized appropriation of Aristotle, call it God. But what it means at the end is that the cosmology of that time meant that people had no choices over fate. Fate was something that was determined by some sort of a mechanics of the universe. And within this reality, believing things are given or determined from top down by a rigid mechanics of the universe, translated into people's perceptions as fate, then arises a school of thought that becomes pretty famous because it says that there's nothing you can do about the fate but to adjust your feelings, your emotions to that fate. As Epictetus says, there's nothing you can do about things that happen, if not just adjust the way you feel about things that happen. So it is a school of thought to which people consciously adhered in order to learn a way of life, which in this specific case of Stoicism moved the spring that helps with the tensions of a deterministic, mechanically engendered universe to the feelings of individuals. They can't change things in this cosmovision. Therefore, they can and must only change the way they feel about things, which is absolutely dangerous used nowadays, and absolutely anachronic and opportunistic used nowadays, but we'll talk about this later. So for Pierre Hadot, philosophy is a way of life, which could be translated nowadays to a posture, and you can learn the posture, and there are different postures, philosophical postures, that you can learn, all of which are historical and historically built, therefore politically engendered, postures. So in order to answer when people ask me, how do I get introduced to philosophy, I used to say the following. On the lines of Karl Jaspers, I would ask, what moves you? What is the mystery that moves you? What is the thing, the object, the feeling, the question that moves you most? And you might be guided by your curiosity. Because departing from that, you may find specific schools of thought that will provide you with tools of thought or ways of living that take under consideration this object. And here I'm talking about metaphysics, aesthetics, politics, technology, science, epistemology, linguistics. All of these are different pillars or verticals within philosophy as a whole, as a phenomenon, as a human phenomenon, that for curiosity's sake, Wilhelm Dilthey even equals it to a mode of language, a linguistic kind of relationship between consciousness and reality and its engenderments. Such as poetry, such as religion, there is also philosophy and science. And even more interestingly, they are historically aligned from poetry to religion to philosophy and then science, in a historical line of impoverishment, of the depth to which we actually deal with things in nature. As far as each step we take on the way, we add more logic, a very, very poor kind of language, according to Dilthey, Nietzsche, Bachelard, Foucault, Deleuze, Bourdieu, the Frankfurt School, and so on. So that's it for today. Don't forget to subscribe, give it a like, and I see you on the next one.